The river ran shallow, deceptively shallow. 30,000 warriors of the Oda Tokugawa alliance stood along the banks of the Anegawa River in central Japan, watching as an even larger force approached from the north. The banners of the Azai and Asakura clans filled the horizon, 40,000 of Japan's finest samurai, led by commanders who had never tasted defeat on the battlefield. Their armor gleamed in the summer sun, their confidence was absolute, and their goal was clear: crush the upstart Oda Nobunaga and maintain the old order of power. But Nobunaga was not an ordinary warlord. He was a revolutionary, a man who broke traditions others considered sacred, who saw warfare not as ritual, but as problem-solving. And on this August day in 1570, at a shallow river crossing in Omi province, he would prove that numerical superiority meant nothing against tactical brilliance and coordinated execution. This is the story of the Battle of Anegawa, the river of blades where samurai honor met cold pragmatism, where traditional warfare collided with innovation, and where two allied clans destroyed Japan's most powerful coalition to change the course of Japanese history forever. Japan in 1570 was a fractured landscape of war. The Sengoku period, the age of warring states, had turned the archipelago into a battleground where hundreds of daimyo, regional warlords, fought for supremacy. The old order had collapsed. The emperor remained a symbolic figurehead in Kyoto, powerless. The Ashikaga shogunate, once the supreme military authority, had devolved into irrelevance. Real power belonged to those who could seize and hold it through military force. Among the rising powers, three clans dominated central Japan. Oda Nobunaga controlled Owari and Mino provinces, the industrial and agricultural heartland. His army was innovative, incorporating large numbers of ashigaru, peasant foot soldiers armed with spears and arquebus, rather than relying solely on samurai cavalry. His tactics were unconventional, his ambitions unlimited, and his reputation was that of a ruthless pragmatist who would do whatever necessary to win. Allied with Oda was Tokugawa Ieyasu, lord of Mikawa province and commander of some of Japan's finest samurai. Where Nobunaga was revolutionary and unpredictable, Tokugawa was methodical and disciplined. His warriors were renowned for their loyalty, training, and tactical cohesion. The alliance between these two clans was relatively new but growing stronger through shared interests and mutual respect. Opposing them was a powerful coalition. The Azai clan controlled northern Omi province, positioned between Nobunaga and the capital at Kyoto. Their lord, Azai Nagamasa, had initially been allied with Oda. Nobunaga had even married his sister to Nagamasa to cement the relationship. But when Nobunaga attacked the Asakura clan, long-standing allies of the Azai, Nagamasa faced an impossible choice: honor his new alliance with Oda or his traditional obligations to Asakura. He chose tradition. Nagamasa betrayed Nobunaga, trapping the Oda forces between his army and the Asakura forces from the north. It was a devastating strategic move that nearly destroyed Nobunaga entirely. Only through a desperate retreat and Tokugawa's timely intervention did Nobunaga escape with his life. Now, months later, Nobunaga was back, and he wanted revenge. The Asakura clan was one of the most formidable military powers in Japan. Their warriors were elite, their commanders experienced, and their strategic position in Echizen province gave them control over critical northern approaches. When Azai Nagamasa called for help against the inevitable Oda counterattack, the Asakura responded with their full strength. The combined Azai-Asakura force numbered around 40,000 warriors, samurai cavalry, ashigaru spearmen, and arquebusiers. They were confident, well-supplied, and fighting on familiar terrain. Their commanders believed they held every advantage. They outnumbered the Oda Tokugawa alliance. They held interior lines of communication, and they were defending their homeland, always a psychological advantage. But they made a critical miscalculation. They assumed Nobunaga would fight like other daimyo, honor-bound, predictable, following the established patterns of samurai warfare. They were wrong. Nobunaga and Tokugawa spent weeks preparing for the confrontation. Intelligence networks, ninja scouts from Iga province employed by Nobunaga, provided detailed information about enemy movements, strength, and intentions. The Allies studied the terrain carefully, identifying the Anegawa River as the likely confrontation point. The river was shallow in summer, easily fordable at multiple points, but it still represented a significant tactical feature. Armies crossing water are vulnerable. Formations break up, command and control becomes difficult, and troops become exhausted. Nobunaga understood that the river could be either a barrier or a trap, depending on how it was used. The Allied strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attempt to defend the entire riverbank or try to prevent the crossing, they would allow the enemy to commit to crossing at specific points. Once the Asakura forces were mid-river, fragmented, and vulnerable, the Tokugawa forces would strike with coordinated attacks designed to exploit the broken formations. Nobunaga would face the Azai clan with his forces. Tokugawa would engage the Asakura. Each commander would be responsible for their section of the battlefield, but they would maintain communication and coordinate timing. The key was simultaneous pressure. If one side broke the enemy while the other held, the breakthrough could be exploited to roll up the entire enemy line. It was a plan that required precise coordination, disciplined execution, and trust between Allied commanders. In the chaotic world of Sengoku warfare, where betrayal was common and alliances fragile, it was a tremendous risk. But Nobunaga and Tokugawa trusted each other, and they trusted their warriors. On August 9, 1570, both armies converged on the Anegawa River near the modern city of Nagahama. The day was hot, oppressively so, with humidity that made armor feel like ovens and turned the earth beneath thousands of feet into dust. The sky was clear, offering no relief from the summer sun. The Azai Asakura coalition arrived first, taking position on the northern bank. Their commanders surveyed the terrain with satisfaction. The river was indeed shallow, fordable along much of its length, and the southern bank, where the enemy would have to position, offered little defensive advantage. They would cross, engage, and overwhelm the numerically inferior Tokugawa forces through sheer weight of numbers and superior samurai quality. When the Tokugawa alliance arrived and deployed along the southern bank, the Azai Asakura commanders noted their dispositions with interest. Nobunaga's forces, perhaps 13,000 strong, faced the Azai across the western section of the river. Tokugawa's forces, roughly 8,000 warriors, deployed opposite the Asakura in the eastern section. Between them flowed the Anegawa, shallow enough to cross but deep enough to disrupt formations. The Allied deployment seemed straightforward, even conservative, but hidden within it were subtle elements that would prove decisive. Nobunaga had positioned his best troops, veteran samurai and disciplined Shigeru units, at key points where he anticipated the Azai would cross. Behind his front lines, concealed by terrain and positioned to appear as reserves, were mobile strike forces capable of rapid deployment to exploit openings. Tokugawa's deployment was even more deceptive. His front appeared thin, almost weak, inviting attack. But behind this apparent weakness was depth. Multiple lines of warriors positioned to absorb and blunt enemy charges while maintaining formation integrity. His flanks were anchored on terrain features that would prevent them from being easily outflanked. As morning shifted toward midday, the tension grew unbearable. Thousands of warriors stood in the summer heat, waiting for the signal that would unleash the storm. Commanders made final checks of their positions. Samurai adjusted armor and checked weapons. A Shigeru planted their spear butts in the earth and waited. And then, from the Asakura side, war drums began to beat. The Azai clan struck first, their warriors wading into the Anegawa with war cries that echoed across the valley. Samurai cavalry urged their horses into the water, followed by waves of a Shigeru. Their advance was impressive, disciplined. Thousands of warriors moving with coordinated purpose, banners flying, the sun glinting off steel and lacquered armor. Nobunaga's forces held the southern bank, allowing the enemy to commit fully to the crossing. Arquebusiers fired controlled volleys, targeting commanders and disrupting formations, but they didn't attempt to stop the crossing entirely. Arrows whistled across the river from both sides, falling like deadly rain. As the Azai forces reached midstream, the river itself became an enemy. The current, stronger than it appeared, pulled at legs and disrupted footing. Formations began to fragment as faster warriors pulled ahead and slower ones fell behind. The neat lines that had entered the water became ragged clusters emerging on the far bank. This was exactly what Nobunaga had anticipated. As the Azai warriors reached the southern bank, tired from fighting the current and disorganized from the crossing, they met not a static defensive line, but a calculated counterattack. Nobunaga's veterans struck at the fragmented units, engaging them before they could reform. The fighting became brutal and intimate. Samurai dueled with swords, their blades flashing in the sunlight. Ashigaru formations locked spears in deadly pushing matches where strength and discipline mattered more than individual skill. Arquebusiers fired at point-blank range into enemy formations. The air filled with the clash of steel, the screams of wounded, and the thunderous reports of gunpowder weapons. Meanwhile, on the eastern section of the battlefield, Tokugawa Ieyasu faced his own challenge. The Asakura clan, considered among the finest warriors in Japan, advanced with terrifying confidence. Their elite samurai, bearing the crossed swords of their clan Mon, rode into the river like an armored tide. Tokugawa's front line, appearing thin and vulnerable, met the Asakura charge with a technique that would become legendary in Japanese military history. Rather than trying to stop the charge directly, the frontline Ashigaru gave ground in a controlled retreat, absorbing the momentum of the Asakura advance while maintaining formation cohesion. This elastic defense drew the Asakura deeper into Tokugawa's positions, where they encountered the second and third lines of warriors waiting in depth. The Asakura charge, devastating in open ground, lost its impact as it pushed into progressively denser resistance. Warriors who had charged with confident aggression found themselves bogged down in grinding, exhausting combat. Tokugawa himself moved among his troops, visible in his distinctive armor, his presence steadying warriors and coordinating the defense. His commanders executed his battle plan with precision, using terrain features to channel enemy movements and positioning reserves to plug gaps before they could be exploited. For nearly an hour, the battle hung in equilibrium. Both sides were fully engaged, fighting with desperate intensity, but neither could gain decisive advantage. The Azai pressed Nobunaga's forces hard, at points nearly breaking through. The Asakura, despite being slowed, continued to push forward through sheer determination and warrior quality. But Nobunaga was waiting for a specific moment, the point where the enemy was fully committed, exhausted from fighting, and psychologically invested in the grinding frontal battle. The moment when they would least expect a sudden shift in tactical dynamics. He saw that moment arrive, and he unleashed his reserve. From Nobunaga's flanks, concealed strike forces suddenly erupted into action. These were not random counterattacks, but carefully coordinated pincer movements designed to hit the Azai forces from multiple directions simultaneously. Fresh troops struck against enemy flanks that had become exposed during the grinding frontal combat. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The Azai warriors, already exhausted from crossing the river and fighting for an hour in the summer heat, suddenly found themselves attacked from directions they hadn't anticipated. Units that had been pushing forward were forced to turn and defend their flanks. Formations that had maintained cohesion began to fragment. Nobunaga's frontline troops, sensing the shift in momentum, pressed their attack with renewed aggression. The Azai forces found themselves caught between the hammer of the frontal assault and the anvil of the flanking attacks. Panic began to spread through the Azai ranks. Units lost contact with their commanders. The coordinated advance dissolved into isolated pockets of resistance. Warriors who had charged confidently into battle began looking for ways to retreat. On the eastern section, Tokugawa observed Nobunaga's success and immediately ordered his own offensive. The Tokugawa forces, which had been absorbing Asakura attacks for an hour, suddenly shifted from defense to attack. Fresh reserves moved forward while the front lines, though tired, pressed with renewed intensity. The Asakura, who had been focused on breaking through Tokugawa's defense, were caught off guard by the sudden aggression. They had exhausted themselves against the elastic defense, and now faced coordinated counterattacks from an enemy that seemed to have found new energy. The coordination between Nobunaga and Tokugawa was critical. The simultaneous pressure from both sections of the battlefield prevented the Azai Asakura coalition from shifting reserves or conducting organized mutual support. Each clan found itself fighting its own desperate battle with no ability to assist their allies. The collapse, when it came, was sudden and complete. The Azai forces, caught in Nobunaga's pincer and suffering heavy casualties, broke. Warriors threw down their weapons and fled back toward the river, attempting to escape the killing field. But the river that had been merely an obstacle during the advance became a death trap during the retreat. Fleeing soldiers were shot down by arquebusiers, cut down by pursuing samurai, or drowned trying to cross while exhausted and panicked. The Asakura forces, seeing their allies shattered and finding themselves now facing the combined attention of both Nobunaga and Tokugawa forces, also began to waver. Their elite samurai fought with desperate courage, attempting to cover the retreat, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. Many died in place, refusing to retreat and fighting until they were overwhelmed. By late afternoon, the Battle of Anegawa was over. The riverbank was littered with bodies, thousands of warriors who had died in the brutal combat. The water of the Anegawa itself ran red, choked with the dead and wounded. Abandoned weapons, broken banners, and shattered armor covered the battlefield. The Azai Asakura coalition had been decisively defeated. Casualty estimates vary, but most sources suggest they lost between 10 and 15,000 warriors killed or wounded, nearly a third of their force. The Tokugawa alliance suffered significant casualties as well, perhaps 5,000, but they held the field and had achieved complete victory. For the Azai and Asakura clans, the defeat was catastrophic. Azai Nagamasa retreated to his fortress at Odani Castle, his military power broken and his strategic position untenable. The Asakura clan, though still controlling their home province, had lost their elite warriors and much of their offensive capability. For Oda Nobunaga, the victory was transformative. He had avenged the earlier betrayal, eliminated a major threat to his realm, and demonstrated that his unconventional tactics could defeat traditional samurai warfare. His reputation, already formidable, became legendary. Daimyo across Japan took notice. This was a warlord who could not be underestimated. For Tokugawa Ieyasu, the battle strengthened his alliance with Nobunaga and established his own reputation as a brilliant defensive commander. His ability to absorb and blunt the Asakura assault, then coordinate with Nobunaga's offensive, showcased tactical sophistication that would serve him well in future conflicts. But beyond the immediate military consequences, Anegawa represented something larger, a turning point in Japanese warfare itself. Nobunaga had demonstrated that innovation and coordination could overcome traditional advantages. He had shown that warfare was evolving, that the old samurai codes and traditional tactics were insufficient in an age of arquebus, mass armies, and pragmatic strategy. The battle's tactical lessons reverberated through Japanese military thinking for generations. The use of terrain to fragment enemy formations, the elastic defense that absorbed and exhausted enemy charges, the coordinated pincer attacks that exploited enemy overextension. These became standard elements of Japanese tactical doctrine. The importance of Allied coordination was particularly noteworthy. Nobunaga and Tokugawa had fought essentially two separate battles against two separate enemies. Yet they had maintained enough coordination to ensure simultaneous pressure that prevented enemy mutual support. This level of Allied cooperation was rare in Sengoku warfare, where treachery and self-interest usually dominated Allied relationships. The battle also highlighted the vulnerability of river crossings. The Asakura commanders had seen the shallow river as a minor obstacle, easily crossed. But Nobunaga and Tokugawa had recognized it as an opportunity, a place where enemy formations would naturally fragment, become exhausted, and expose themselves to counterattack. The same water that seemed passable became a killing ground when combined with tactical intelligence. Psychologically, Anegawa demonstrated the power of momentum and timing. Both sides had fought desperately for an hour with no clear advantage, But when Nobunaga launched his coordinated flank attacks at precisely the right moment, the entire battle shifted in minutes. Timing, knowing when to commit reserves, when to transition from defense to offense, proved as important as the quality of the warriors themselves. The aftermath of Anegawa unfolded over the following months and years. Azai Nagamasa held out in Odani Castle for 3 more years, but his position was hopeless. In 1573, facing inevitable defeat, he committed seppuku, ritual suicide, as Nobunaga's forces overran the fortress. Nobunaga forced Nagamasa's wife, his own sister, to leave before the final assault, then ordered the execution of Nagamasa's children to eliminate future threats. The Asakura clan suffered an even swifter fate. Weakened by their losses at Anegawa, they were destroyed by Nobunaga in 1573. The clan leadership was killed, their territories absorbed, and their power erased from Japanese politics. With the Azai and Asakura eliminated, Nobunaga controlled the critical corridor between his base in Owari and the capital at Kyoto. This gave him the strategic positioning to continue his campaign to reunify Japan under his rule. Though he would be assassinated in 1582 before completing this goal, his successors, including Tokugawa Ieyasu, would finish what he started. Tokugawa himself would go on to become the founder of the Tokugawa shogunate, which ruled Japan for over 250 years. His experience fighting alongside Nobunaga at Anegawa shaped his understanding of warfare, alliance politics, and the importance of strategic patience combined with tactical aggression. Today, the Anegawa River flows peacefully through Shiga Prefecture, a quiet waterway surrounded by farmland and small towns. Modern visitors would find it difficult to imagine that this gentle stream was once the site of one of the bloodiest battles of the Sengoku period. A small monument marks the approximate location of the battle, but otherwise, time has erased the physical traces of the carnage. Yet the battle lives on in Japanese historical memory. It is studied in schools, depicted in films and television dramas, and analyzed in military academies. The Battle of Anegawa represents a crucial moment in the Sengoku period, the point where Nobunaga's innovative approach to warfare definitively proved its superiority over traditional methods. For students of military history, Anegawa offers enduring lessons. It demonstrates how numerical inferiority can be overcome through superior tactics and coordination. It shows the importance of terrain analysis and the ability to turn natural features into tactical advantages. It illustrates how patience and timing can be as valuable as martial prowess. And it proves that the quality of leadership, the ability to inspire trust, coordinate complex operations, and make critical decisions under pressure, often determines the outcome of battles more than raw military strength. As the sun set over the Anegawa on August 9, 1570, Oda Nobunaga stood among the carnage, surveying the battlefield that had secured his strategic position and shattered his enemies. His armor was spattered with blood, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes reflected satisfaction. Tokugawa Ieyasu approached, equally tired but composed. The two commanders stood together in silence for a moment, watching their warriors tend to the wounded and collect the dead. "Your flanking attack was perfectly timed," Tokugawa said finally. Nobunaga nodded. "And your defense held when it needed to hold, then struck when striking would do the most damage. We fought 2 battles today, but as one army." "The Azai and Asakura fought as 2 armies," Tokugawa observed. "That made the difference." "That," Nobunaga agreed. "And the river? They saw it as an obstacle to overcome. We saw it as a weapon to use. They thought in terms of how things have always been done. We thought in terms of how things needed to be done." Tokugawa looked at the blood-stained water of the Anegawa. "Many will say we won through treachery, that we abandoned samurai honor. Many will say many things," Nobunaga replied, his voice hard. "The dead have no use for honor. The defeated cannot rebuild with tradition. We won because we understood that war is not ritual, it is survival. And survival requires adaptation." He turned to face Tokugawa directly. "Japan is changing. The old ways, the old powers, the old assumptions, they are dying like the warriors on this riverbank. What comes next will be built by those who can see beyond tradition to reality, who can adapt faster than their enemies, who can win not through honor alone, but through intelligence and will. Tokugawa considered this, then nodded slowly. Then let us ensure that what we build is worthy of those who died to make it possible. The two commanders, allies who would shape Japan's future through their partnership and eventual rivalry, stood together as darkness fell over the River of Blades. They had won a great victory, crushed a powerful coalition, and demonstrated that the future of Japanese warfare belonged to those who could innovate rather than those who clung to tradition. The Anegawa had run shallow that morning. By evening, it ran red with the blood of thousands. And when its waters finally cleared in the days that followed, they carried away not just the physical remains of the battle, but the old certainties of Sengoku warfare itself. The age of innovation had dawned. The path to Japanese unification had been cleared, and two allied clans had proven that tactical brilliance, strategic coordination, and the willingness to fight smarter rather than just harder could defeat even the strongest warlords. The river flowed on, eternal and indifferent, but the world it flowed through had changed. Anegawa had not just been a battle. It had been a revolution, written in blood and steel on the banks of a shallow summer river, where two visionaries proved that the future belongs not to the strongest, but to the wisest.